On this show, we'll be discussing the vaccine debate in America. Oregon has some of the lowest vaccination rates in the country. We'll be talking to both sides to find out why it's such a controversial topic there.
There's always been opposition to vaccines ever since the first one.
Nobody wants to be vilified. Nobody wants someone to come out and scream that their children should die.
And Daesh bride US-born Hoda Muthana, should she be allowed back in the country?
It's our position that you can't simply strip away citizenship once awarded with a tweet.
We'll ask whether the US government decision is constitutional and whether anti-Muslim bias is affecting her case. Here in New York, The Square starts now. Welcome to Times Square in New York. I'm Sally Ihan. On this show, we'll be talking about real issues affecting people across America and hearing from those who are at the heart of the debate. And we want you to get involved. You can contact us on Facebook and Twitter at TRT World and let us know what you think about some of the topics we discuss. Now, first on the show, the issues of vaccinating children. In some states in America, it's compulsory to vaccinate, and children are not allowed to attend public school if they're not vaccinated against several illnesses, including measles, hepatitis, and chickenpox. Legislation varies from state to state, and on the West Coast in Oregon, vaccinations are a hot topic. It has some of the lowest vaccination rates in the US, and people on both sides of the argument feel very passionately. I travelled to Oregon to find out more. I'm on my way to the West Coast of America. Here, the vaccine debate has recently been reinvigorated, as it has across the country and the world. Italy has recently made vaccinations compulsory, and the Oregon government is trying to do the same. Currently, state law allows parents to abstain from vaccinating their children for philosophical reasons, but a bill to make non-medical vaccinations compulsory could end it.
For the voyage is long and the winds don't blow and it's time.
I've come to Ashland, situated on the southernmost tip of the Rogue Valley. It's an affluent city with a vibrant art scene and a liking to natural therapies. Longtime resident and author Jennifer Margulis is one of the main resources for the town when it comes to the vaccination debate. She says Ashland is a role model for healthy living.
I'm not anti-vaccine. My children are vaccinated and I've been vaccinated. My concern is about the current American schedule of childhood vaccinations because we are doing too many vaccines from too early an age. So we're asking parents to vaccinate over and over again in such a way that is potentially causing damage to our children's health. We don't know exactly what it is. We have some excellent theories about the mechanisms of the damage. Measles can be a deadly serious disease, but in the United States, especially among children and adults who have access to clean drinking water and good nutrition, measles is not a deadly disease. Measles is a normal childhood rite of passage. Ask anyone over 60.
A woman died from measles in northern Washington in 2015.
Was that a confirmed case?
It was a confirmed case of a woman who died from measles.
In Oregon, there are 4 million people, and we've had 1 case of the measles in the last how many years? So you have a 1 in 4 million chance of coming down with the measles. You were saying that you were having trouble getting people to talk to you on the record, people who have vaccine safety issues. Part of the reason why is that nobody wants to be vilified. Nobody wants someone to come out and scream that their children should die. When you are moderate, when you understand vaccine safety concerns, as I am, even when you're pro-vaccine, people will send death threats against you and call you all sorts of names. It's unbelievable. It's so polarizing that you can't have the conversation.
Away from cameras, Jennifer shared some of the hate mail she's received. People have written to her saying that her kids should die because of the things she said publicly about vaccinations. She says she's a moderate voice, but her comments have caused backlash with mainstream media accusing her of spreading misinformation. I wanted to meet those who vehemently disagree with vaccinating their own children to try and better understand the basis of their argument. When I started to do my research, I struggled to find people who would talk on camera. After making contact in Ashland, some local residents got in touch. They said they were concerned that I'd vilify them on camera.
Where does this come from? Where does this fear to speak out come from?
Kadria. Saying someone is an anti-vaxxer is a derogatory term, and it's intended to dehumanize and dismiss people who are questioning vaccines. And as an educated independent thinker and a critical thinker, I feel that I have every right to question anything, especially a substance that's going to be injected into my body or my child's body.
The Centers for Disease Control came to Ashland in 2009, and what they were interested in was, what does it take for parents to vaccinate according to the schedule? And what we said to the CDC at that time, we want the vaccine safety studies. What the CDC says, yes, but we want you to vaccinate. So we're talking past each other. We're not having the conversation like we're having at this table right now. I understand how we got to this point and where vaccinations fit into this dialogue, this conversation. What we're ignoring is the science that incriminates vaccines.
Do you think it's contentious?
I think it's manufactured to be that way because it didn't used to be, at least in my experience. My oldest child is over 20 and I never experienced any of the kind of anger and shaming of people who questioned it. I never experienced that. When he went to school, they said, oh, these are the vaccines that are required. I said, I'm not going to do those. They said, oh, here's a form. I signed it. Nobody shamed me. Nobody bullied me. Nobody said, why in the world would you do that?
What happens if that bill goes through? What happens? What does that mean for you guys?
If this bill goes through, they won't be able to get an education in this state. I have a business. I employ a lot of people. I have a storefront. I have a farm. I would have to either have my children be pariahs in their state or leave. And that's huge for me. That's like a big thing for me to try to figure out at this point.
And it's not worth vaccinating your children?
No, I will never vaccinate my children anymore because I've seen those red flags along the way and I know what's going to happen if I continue. And it's not worth it.
It's not worth your house, your job, the community you've built?
None of that's worth injuring my child for.
It's clear why this debate is so emotional. Everyone wants what they think is best for their child. I've come to meet Sabrina McNeil. She sadly lost her 2-year-old son to meningitis prior to the vaccine being available.
He came down with what we thought was the flu. It was flu-like symptoms. And we took care of him, gave him the, necessary medications that he needed, but he just kept getting worse. And so we ended up taking him to the ER, and it ended up that he did not have the flu. He had bacterial meningitis or pneumococcal meningitis. And at that point, he was airlifted to Portland Children's Hospital and passed away later that week. I understand the parents' side of not wanting to vaccinate their children. It's scary. When we become parents, we want what's best for our children. So we do our research, we do our homework to see what's best for my child. I understand that point of view, but I also trust my pediatrician and what he tells me. I believe that he has the scientific backing for vaccines. I believe he understands the risks of not being vaccinated because he has experience.
Vaccinations currently prevent 2 to 3 million deaths a year. But with sentiment against vaccines growing, the World Health Organization says it's one of the top 10 health problems in the world. After leaving Ashland, I've decided to head to Portland to find out how the debate is being received in the state's biggest city. Health officials say one of the biggest challenges in encouraging people to vaccinate is widespread misinformation online. Associate Professor of Pediatrics at the Oregon Health and Science University, Dr. Dawn Nault, studies the threats of infectious diseases.
There's always been opposition to vaccines ever since the first one, and concerns about vaccine fall into 3 categories. It's whether they are safe, whether they're necessary, or if there's an overall distrust of authority in terms of medical communities or science or pharmaceuticals making recommendations. So we have to understand that people are in their minds having a risk-benefit ratio. And if you're not seeing the diseases like physicians are seeing, the active diseases like tetanus and measles, then parents are looking at the risk of small side effects And in their mind, that outweighs the possible benefit of a disease they've never seen.
What role does the government play in making these decisions?
In America, as in many countries, we really value autonomy and individual choice. But the decision for a family to make a risky intervention on their child, to defer vaccinations, shouldn't impact on the risk and health of all the rest of the community.
I'm told that Oregon is a pioneering state where people don't settle with the status quo. But when a resurgence of measles north of the border in Washington state infected 73 people, the vaccine debate turned even more contentious. In downtown Portland, a marketing agency responded to the outbreak by starting a satirical anti-vaccine lifestyle blog. Executive Director Rob Thompson wanted to highlight the power of misinformation online. He uses parody in blog posts and on merchandise.
A lot of what we are pivoting off of is very exaggerated, very conspiratorial. You know, it is not a well-researched opinion. It's a lot of sort of hearsay that I think just gets recycled, amplified, and what we've done is just taken that and kind of dialed it up even further.
Sales from the merchandise go towards a pro-vaccine advocacy agency.
Initial reaction was kind of very, very polarized on the two ends of the spectrum. We had people who thought it was real, who were like, oh gosh, this is great, we're so excited to see this. And then we had people who were just really irate that we were going to make t-shirts and mugs that promoted this anti-vaccination stance. And we realized fairly quickly we needed to dial up the parity, because if we were too close to what's being presented already by the anti-vaccination movement, it was just sailing past people. And our goal isn't to trick people. Our goal is to sort of elicit a chuckle, get people to sort of, in that context, think about the debate.
The reality for some people in Oregon is that the low rate of vaccinations creates a feeling of uncertainty.
I've always had a concern about the low rates of vaccination. My youngest was an infant and too young to be vaccinated last year, not this year during the outbreak, but the year before. And I was concerned about it then because you can't avoid public places, especially when you have an older kid. You're going to school for drop-offs and pickups, and you know that there's a high potential for an outbreak. To require vaccination to attend public schools, I think is a fair ask for the sake of the public health. I think there's a little bit too much of a judgmental or condescending attitude on the part of people who support vaccinations. Ultimately, more information, better information, educating people is ultimately going to get us where we want to be. And I think, you just push people farther into a corner by judging them too harshly.
After learning about the different opinions regarding vaccinations here in Oregon, it seems to me that the vaccine debate doesn't follow the usual political polarization in the US. It's not liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican. It's far more nuanced than that. But at the core of this debate is the question that spills into many issues here in the US: how to balance the protection of individual liberty with the rights of the community we live in. There's been plenty of coverage in the media recently about 24-year-old Hoda Muthana. She was born in New Jersey in 1994, and her family had come to the US because of her father's job as a Yemeni diplomat at the UN. Muthana was studying at university in Alabama, and in November 2014, she used her college tuition fund from her parents to travel to Syria and join Daesh.
She is a terrorist. She's not a U.S. citizen. She ought not return to this country.
I'm a citizen and there's papers to prove it. I'm just as American as any blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl, and I would like to stay in my country. I hope America doesn't think I'm a threat to them, and I hope they can accept me.
I want to bring in our guest to talk more about this story. With me in the studio, Jamila Biggio. She's a senior fellow with the Council on Foreign Relations, and Daisy Khan, who is the executive director of the Women's Islamic Initiative for Spirituality and Equality. Thanks very much for joining us. Let's start with you, Jamila. We do know that Hoda Muthana was drawn into Daesh by using Twitter and social media. Can you just give us some examples about how that might happen, how young women and girls get seduced into extremist groups like this?
Yeah, so Daesh has made strategic use of new technologies and is able, through social media tools, to put forward messages directed specifically to Western women like Hoda and to encourage them to join Daesh. And they use messages pushing ideas of opportunities to belong to a broader group, pushing a sense of adventure and being part of the effort of creating a new caliphate. On the flip side, we know that efforts to counter radicalization haven't taken into account how Daesh is specifically targeting women and how effective it's been.
So what are some of the ways in which women can help drive and influence extremism as well in order to make it rise?
Well, we see that women act as perpetrators in a wide variety of ways. First, they perpetrate violence. Around the world in 2017, nearly 11% of all suicide attacks were perpetrated by women. In Nigeria, it's closer to half of all of the suicide attacks were perpetrated by women. We also see that women offer a wide variety of material support. They help radicalize and recruit those around them. They contribute to fundraising. They push propaganda. We also see that they help to radicalize their own families and to potentially raise their children to continue to advance the ideology.
And Daisy, you work within the Muslim community here in New York and other parts of America. What has been the general response from the Muslim community about Hoda Muthana's case?
There is a double standard at play again, one more time, because the men that were captured have all been sent back here and there, you know, facing the justice system, and many of them are in jail. So why are we keeping the women out? I mean, it's not just Hoda, like 13 women have still not been allowed back in, and they have children with them. So the issue is why the double standard of not allowing women? Are they a bigger threat? What is the issue?
Is there some reluctance and perhaps resentment as well, though, that these people have used Islam as kind of a beacon for extreme violence, especially given the fact that the Muslim community are quite powerful in the rehabilitation of many ex-fighters? Is there not some sort of reluctance there?
Our research showed that Islam is being used as a weapon by Daesh very strategically. And this is why they were able to recruit so many young millennials who are not well-versed in their religion. So oftentimes they can be recruited very easily, and this is why I'm trying to convince people that rehabilitation is possible. If we bring some of these people back to the United States, that we can actually work with them and reform them and rehabilitate them.
Hoda spent years living with Daesh. How does an experience like that transform someone's identity, and how do you unwind that transformation through de-radicalization?
Well, first of all, there is the importance of holding her accountable for having traveled and joined Daesh in the first place. So when we encourage her to be brought home, it's also to face trial here and to be held accountable. And then from there are opportunities and pathways to rehabilitation. So we see leaders here in the United States across extremist groups, whether former jihadists or former white nationalist extremist leaders, who have formed communities where they help those who are exiting to create new ties and to be able to be reformed and reintegrated back into their communities.
Just let me stop the conversation there for now. Let's hear from the lawyer Charles Swift, who's bringing this case on behalf of Muthana's family. He says the actions by the US government are unconstitutional.
Hoda Muthana's case represents extraordinary circumstances under both the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, the Due Process Clause, and under the 14th Amendment, which is birthright citizenship. And it's our position that you can't simply strip away citizenship once awarded with a tweet. The American administration gave her not one, but 2 U.S. passports. Now, there's only one way to get a passport. You're a citizen. The American administration knows and admits that she was born in New Jersey. If she's committed a crime, then that's what we have courts for, that's what we have attorneys for, and that's what we have due process for, and we determine if she's committed a crime and she may be sentenced. It's rather ironic because under the law, I do national security law, and under the law, if she wasn't a U.S. citizen, there's no way she could have committed a crime in this country. So by asserting her citizenship, she's also placing herself before the jurisdiction of the courts. If we can allow the minority to be stripped of their rights because I don't like you, then who's next?
I'm still here with Jamila and Daisy, but let's bring in Claudia Rosette. She's a foreign policy fellow with Independent Women's Forum, and she's on Skype to talk to us. Good to have you with us, Claudia. Firstly, we heard from the lawyer there. Clearly, he says that Hoda Muthana is deserving of what he calls her citizenship, but the State Department has a different idea. There's a lot of ambiguities here. Do you think that there's an emotional ruling or a constitutional ruling over this case?
I don't think it's either one. Look, the courts in the end will decide. There's now a lawsuit. But the actual documents filed with the court show that she was not a citizen when she was born. It's quite clear-cut, actually. This is a case where it's being presented by Hoda Muthana herself and her lawyers and her father as a constitutional issue. They have been ignoring the documents actually pertaining to his status as a diplomat from Yemen.
Well, Claudia, one of the bases that the lawyer is arguing is that Hoda Muthana's father was no longer a diplomat when she was born, and also if she wasn't a citizen, then the government made not just one mistake by issuing a passport, but 2.
Well, the law is very clear on this. It's when the United Nations notifies the U.S. State Department that diplomatic status has ended, that it ends. So, her father was staying here for months after his job apparently ended at the Yemen mission. There's an argument to be made based on the actual documents and her father's actual actions and the timing that she was never a citizen, and that makes it a rather different case.
Daisy, it's a complicated case here. We've just heard from Claudia there. There's many different perspectives on whether or not this is constitutional. Do you think there's an emotional element? Is there anti-Muslim bias?
Yeah, I think that had she not joined Daesh, this probably issue would never even have surfaced, because we probably have other people like her, that fall into the gray area. But legal things set aside, she is an American.
It's obviously a very, very grey area. There's a lot to be looked at from the legal side of things. What's your position here, Jamila?
Well, the other area of emotion that enters is how to deal with women who have joined Daesh. Because in fact, for the first few years when women joined Daesh, countries treated them as if they weren't actual terrorists. We found across Europe and in the United States that women were less likely to be convicted, and they were given lower than average sentences than men who had joined Daesh. And this exposed the United States and other countries to security threats. In the last few years, this has shifted, and countries are starting to appreciate that women are more than naive jihadi brides, and in fact, they do pose a security threat.
Should we really be believing the jihadi bride narrative, the brainwashing, I'm a poor victim now in a refugee camp, when clearly the atrocities of Daesh were very well documented when she actually went over to Syria in the first place?
Yeah, we don't disagree with that at all. We can't say that she didn't make a mistake. She made a grave mistake. I agree that, she witnessed the horror committed against girls and women, but that is part of the rehabilitation, to show them what they were an accessory to. Only then can they show remorse. I don't think the remorse happens just because they're in a camp there, because they are surrounded by an atmosphere. There's nobody helping them and guiding them and getting them to think differently about this issue. I think we need to use a little compassion here. I agree, and we need to remove the threat, and they can become champions. they can become champions for a different way of thinking about this issue. And the reason I'm saying this is because we're talking about Daesh today. Tomorrow we'll be speaking about the white supremacy who are also using women. What are we going to do with them? So we need to learn from these girls to see how we can rehabilitate them, because tomorrow we may have to rehabilitate white supremacy groups, because they're already in this country. They're not going to go anywhere.
Jamila, thanks very much. Daisy and Claudia as well. Now, that's all the time we have for today, but we want to hear what you think about the issues we've discussed. You can contact us on Facebook and Twitter at TRT World. Thanks to the team here in New York. Until next time, on The Square.